Hi, everybody. It's so good to have you here again. This Facebook Live will last about 30 minutes, and we're going to talk about fake news and stress. As a special guest, we have today Romina Ruiz Goiriena. She's an American journalist. My name is Ana Stephanie Munoz. I am a Guatemalan entrepreneur, transformational and stress management coach, and I provide tools to successful people to find happiness and balance in their lives. If the sound is okay, please give me likes and comment below. I have taken into account all the recommendations you have given me to improve the sound, so I hope it's better. Anyway, any comments, just put them right there. And something new I want to ask you is that if there are other issues related to stress that you want to know more about, please also write it down so I can find experts and we can talk about this in later Facebook lives. So as our special guest today, as I was saying, Romina Ruiz Goiriena. She's a seasoned multimedia journalist and producer that covers politics and immigration issues. She has worked in Paris, Cuba, Israel, Guatemala, and the US. For her investigations into how deported parents were lost in Central America and the US authorities during the separation crisis at the border, which landed the cover of Newsweek, Romina is a winner of the 2019 NAHJ Award. Romy, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Could you share something else about yourself with our audience, please?
Well, fun fact, you enjoying this climate and this wonderful background because I'm locked out of my house. But as the always news-ready journalist, I always have my computer. I may not have my keys, but I definitely have my computer and the internet connection. What can I share with you guys? I started my journalism career in the Middle East. I never dreamt of being a journalist. I was actually going to work in international development, and then a war started, and I was a stringer, and I became completely fixated, and I've been in it ever since.
Okay, perfect. So that's interesting story, Romy, and I'm sorry to hear that you're locked outside your house, but as a journalist, you're always ready. You're always prepared to anything, so that's great. So I want to start. The Facebook Live today is about fake news. In general, news affect us, but I want to ask you, and if you can share with our audience, what exactly is fake news?
So that's a wonderful question, Stephanie, and I'm sure people have a lot of questions about it because we saw it sort of like implode on the internet. All of a sudden, that word was like hashtag fake news, world leaders use it. And I think the first thing I want people to understand is that fake news, it's not the same thing as news you don't like. Okay. Because sometimes we read something in the newspaper and we don't like it and we want to say that it's fake news, and that's not what it is. According to the Associated Press, their style guide, what it is information or the phenomenon of spreading deliberate false information online. So it's masked, it's news, it's not news, it's stories or propaganda or falsehoods that are spread on fake sites or by Twitter robots or all these things. And it's promoted as if it was real information. Like it basically tries to confuse you so that you think that it's from a newspaper, but it's not.
Okay. And how do we know that it's not right, that it's fake?
Well, it's often really complicated. Even journalists, we have to have like special trainings. I just did a training with Google News, the Google News Initiative, which launched right after the election. And it's about figuring out if pictures have been doctored, if, like all these kinds of things. So we use technology too once we see things online. But I think for the daily user, the most important thing is to subscribe to a local news and subscribe to a credible international news outlet. I think that that's a really great starting point.
Okay, that's really important. And for audience, like if we want to know what's really going on, to connect to news broadcasts that we know that are reliable, right? So regarding that, one of the things, that has happened, it has happened to me, is that in the last years, I kind of like cut or shut down about finding out what was going on worldwide. In what sense? I found that most of the news were so negative and so bad, and that all the good things weren't really news. And it started, stressing me out a lot. So I started not reading and just finding out what was going on through other people that I trust, that I know they're telling the truth. But I want to ask you if you can tell us, like, what's our responsibility as adults to know what's going on in the world? Because I know my issue is that um, I know I need to be more aware of what's going on. I don't want to live in a bubble or anything. But I want to understand, like, what do you recommend to do it rightly and not to engage and understand our responsibility? Because if we want a better world, we need to know what's going on.
I think, and this is not to put you on the spot, but I
Don't
think
worry.
sometimes I think sometimes people believe that they have so much stress in their lives, and when they
Mhm.
want to cut out things that stress them out, one of the things that they immediately cut out is news. And I think news is much, I mean, I've always been a news nut, even when I was a kid, but I guess I would ask you, I'm sure a lot of people get stressed out paying bills. It doesn't mean you stop paying your bills. Do you stop paying your bills? No. That's part of what it means to be an adult. It's the same thing with news. I think, I think actually, and I think that how people feel, I think what there is a general exhaustion. And that comes from, and very validly so, it comes from the fact that, you turn on 24-hour news channels and you might have a reporter that
Mhm.
files a report from the Pentagon, and it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And he's telling you, like, this is what happened, this is what's going on, or right now we're going through impeachment hearings. And you'll hear the reporters tell you. But the problem, or the thing where I think people become more stressed, is that when it goes back to the newsroom, they're sitting with a panel of analysts, of people that are attorneys,
Mhm.
that are politicians, that are former politicians, and they're giving their opinion. And I think sometimes people confuse what those people are saying. It's not the
Mhm.
same what they say, like they are entitled to give their opinion, versus what the reporter is saying. And I think maybe now we might fall into the trap of giving more room to the analysts than to the reporters. And that's where the tension is.
Okay.
I mean, and if there's things you don't like, what can I say? One of my favorite quotes is that the job of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Yeah. No, I like that quote. It's really, really accurate, and especially that, yeah, it gets confused, and sometimes there are topics that we don't really understand, like too technical or too out of our reach of the things we normally know or we normally work in. And that's, when we start getting like these strange ideas or this stress because we don't really understand what's going on or what's happening or what they're saying. Sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's really negative. So what would you say it's our responsibility? What do we need to do? Like, how can we be more into understanding, into really connecting with what's going on, but handling it in a different way, not stressing it more than our everyday things, but taking the news as they are news, and this is what's going on in the world. How would you recommend the process for us to handle it accurately and not giving us stress that we don't need, more stress in our lives?
I mean, I I I don't know if it's going to make you more stressed or less stressed. I can't
Mhm.
speak to that, but I can tell you that I think what happens when people see the news,
Mhm.
and it's interesting because it doesn't only happen with like certain people who are privileged. I see
Mhm.
it. There's like generally people that disengage from the news either are incredibly privileged or they're incredibly underprivileged. So it's like the extreme parts of society. And why does that
Okay.
happen? because every single day, the news, they believe, doesn't affect their lives. Like, they can go on day to day and not see, for example, you look at the trade war that the United States had with China. A lot of people don't know that, and all these sanctions went in, and a lot of people don't know that they're currently paying more money for their groceries. They're paying more money for anything that's imported, any electronics. Like, they don't see that. And so they think that it doesn't affect them, but they're not aware, you know? I think the thing that becomes challenging when people look at the news is that it confronts them with reality. So what's going to happen? You're going to have emotions. There are things you're going to like. There are things you're not going to like. There are things you're going to agree with. There are things that are going to make you upset. And there are things that are going to make you question, and this is where I think the tension lies, how you feel or what your role is in society in regards to that news. So if you think that you're not doing anything, the news is going to remind you that you're standing by. Or if you voted for someone and they're not, you know, delivering the results that you expected, the news is going to confront you with that reality. And then it's going to ask you, like, what are you going to do? So I think, like, it's almost like, for me, it's almost like a necessary tension. I find that accepting that it's part of life always helps. I always find that acceptance is the answer. Just from a practical point of view, I think that I would start small. So I would commit to buying a newspaper, you know, a subscription to your local newspaper, and a subscription to an international news source, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, whatever it is. I would totally commit because it's going to give you different perspectives. And then I would probably, like, down analyst and watching 24-hour news. I mean, just from reading the newspaper, or, you know, public radio is really great. International public radio, the BBC World Service is really great. They're going to give you, like, what it is. And I think it's more important to choose quality over quantity. So I would do that. I would, like, commit to, there's a show that I really like, The World, that's a co-production by the BBC. You give it an hour of your day, and it goes around the world. So you'll learn, and you'll know everything you need to know. And it's not, I don't find it to be particularly biased. It's the information. You know, you walk out of there being like, okay, I got this covered. I think, like, I would start small, but know where to look first, and then drown out everything else. Like, I would drown out, you know, having the TV on the back. I would drown out being on Twitter all the time. One more thing that I do want to add, sometimes people believe, so there are a lot of verified accounts on Twitter, and I'm a fan. Like, one of my recommendations is that you follow verified accounts. However, just because it's a verified account doesn't mean that that person doesn't have an opinion. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to agree. What verified means is that it is not a robot, and it is a person with a certain amount of following. So you might, you know, run into people that expound beliefs that are very incendiary or are very different, and they would have a blue check mark. Like, they may lie. People with blue check marks lie. So let's not confuse verification that social media does with true information.
Okay. Blue checks. I've never heard of that blue check. Can you tell us a little?
If you go, I mean, if you go on Facebook, or if you go on Twitter or on Instagram, and you go to, say, like, famous people accounts, or even journalists that are very renowned, if you look at it, like, pull out your phone, I'll do it here. Let me do somebody famous in the news. Let me do Wolf Blitzer, right? I'm going to do it right here to show you guys what it's like. What'll happen is that Twitter has verified, I mean, you see that there's a check mark next to his name? And what that means is that it's his, really, they verified that it's his account. But case in point, without saying too much, right? Case in point, I follow, clearly because of my job, the President of the United States. He has a check mark. He's not very much known for saying truthful things. He says them. It's really him who's saying them, but it doesn't mean that the content of what he's saying, it's not like they're saying that the content is what is verified. The fact who's saying it is verified, but not what they're saying. So I think this is my best example of somebody who can have a verified account and
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, there are questions about how truthful his statements are.
Okay. Has verify account. Hold on. I'm writing this down for our audience so they know this tip and they can, blue check mark to know if the person has a verify account. So I think this is a really good tip, especially when we're starting to read about some people we start to follow and people that we find interesting to see if actually it's a real like a verify account or not, and we're following who knows who or who knows what.
Yeah, like sometimes you're following, this was a big problem in the 2016 election, that it was actual bots and people that will buy farm users. Like it'll look like they have 100,000 users, but they're not real people.
Okay.
That's something that happens. I will say that the only exception, and I forgot to mention this, with the check mark
Mhm.
is when you follow a news outlet, for example, the New York Times, the Guardian. When you follow the check mark, it
Mhm.
means that it is official information. So that's the
Oh,
difference
okay.
between sort of like following the journalist that might tell you, hey, I was talking to so and they told me this. And by the time it makes it onto the Twitter feed of the newspaper,
Mhm.
it means that it's verified. It's
Mhm.
legitimate. It's information. It's the same
Mhm.
thing. And like following like a news source on Twitter is the same thing as reading their paper. It's the
Okay.
same standard. They're not going to put it on there unless it's super verified.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Perfect.
Another thing that I recommend is
Uh-huh.
always following, just so you know, I mean, you have to take it then with a grain of salt. But when you
Mhm.
follow like president's accounts,
Mhm.
leaders' accounts, like you're going to hear their perspective first. Doesn't mean that it's
Mhm.
truthful, doesn't mean that it's accurate, it doesn't mean that they don't have an agenda, but at least you can attribute it directly to the person.
Mhm.
It's not he
Okay.
said, she said. It's I believe I'm saying this.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. So that we know that's it's like let's say the president from the United States he says this. It doesn't mean it's true, but that's what he thinks about the situation or whatever he's saying.
It also means that he said it by him
Exactly.
putting it, and that's a thing. Like when, as a journalist writing a story, the
Hmm.
first place that we'll look at for comments, and it doesn't necessarily happen with Facebook or Instagram, we'll
Hmm.
look at the Twitter feed of the leader, and if they have tweeted something, it is seen as a verbal response.
Okay. Yeah.
It is quotable.
He said
It's like
this.
in their
Hmm.
right in a Twitter feed, like on his Twitter feed, so and
Hmm.
so said X, and it's seen as
Hmm.
an official reply.
Okay.
That's
Perfect.
why, for example, when you follow celebrities, it's not just politicians, it's not just hard news. When you
Mhm.
follow celebrities, that's where you go. Most of the
Exactly.
time, when people have died, this is also news, right? When legends, I mean, Toni Morrison died, this year, all this
Mhm.
stuff. Where will you look? The estate will put a tweet notifying, and it's an official tweet, and then all the journals can like write about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. That's great. And that leads me to my next question. It has to do that. What's the process that news journalists use to verify if a lead or a potential story is credible? If you can tell us more about that.
Uh, yes, I can try. I can try and answer your question. I think when I worked for the Associated Press, we
Hmm.
had a thing that we used to say, get the news first, but get it right. But get it right
Hmm.
first.
Hmm.
So it's not important. I mean, it is important to get it first, but it's important to get it right first before you get it.
Hmm.
So what happens? Most of the time before social media, it was usually like police radios that journalists would have police radios in the newsroom, or they would have local radio stations, because most of the time, if there was a crash, if there was something, it was like there used to be these helicopters that would circulate cities and would notify you. Now that's sort of been replaced to a large degree, but it goes hand in hand with what Twitter does. And what it is a tweet. It's a buzz. It's a sound. It's like, hey, this could be happening, right? So what a journalist does, say that there's a natural disaster in a faraway place. Somebody tweets about it. When it's an occurrence, so one
Hmm.
is an event, two is an occurrence, three is a trend.
Hmm.
So by the time you see the third tweet, you know that there's something happening. What is happening? Maybe not what's on that tweet. So what do? The next level of things is that you try to find official sources. So say there's a natural disaster in a city. The first thing you do is, I lived in Guatemala. Guatemala has earthquakes. As soon as there's an earthquake in Guatemala, local news may not be reporting it, but the U.S. Geological Center has monitors, has satellites. So the first thing that'll happen 3 minutes after that happens is that when you look online, it'll tell you, it'll confirm that there was a seismic shift. It'll say, the earth moved. So all of a sudden, as a journalist, the first thing you do is you pick up the phone, you file your news, and you're like, hey, I can confirm because I was here and I felt it. Or, it happened in the northern province. USGS is saying there was a thing, there was an earthquake, it moved, it was such and 4.5 on the Richter scale or whatnot. That information goes out. What happens is that then all these other news outlets are informed that this has happened. What do they do at the next level? You start researching, and if it's a beat that you covered, a beat is like how I cover politics or I cover immigration. So I have sources, I have long-standing, I know who's where. I just open up my phone and I start calling the officials that would be able to verify. Okay. I do not ask, and it's important to understand this, the secretary or the accountant of emergency response, if it is correct. It's very important who you ask the question to. I ask the person that can answer it. And the person that can answer it is either somebody directly in charge or a communications person, a spokesperson that is speaking for the institution. So then that's a second source. So you have USGS, but that's a very good source. Like that's a pretty standard, like undisputable, because they're going to show you a map of how it shook. And then you then have official sources. Now, where does it get hairy? Death counts. I'm sure, like, this is a thing that people always ask about. Number of dead, number of hurt. When you go to a protest and a journalist says there was 1 million people, like, how do we get those numbers? The first thing is, most of the time you're supposed to ask officials. You ask officials what and that's why it'll say the official death toll count. And if the journalist at the place sees empirically, looks around and sees more, they say there's 10 dead, but the journalist is at a place and sees 20 people, they will tell their editor, hey, they're telling me to.
We can't hear you. Hold on. The sound.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I accidentally. No, I was saying that a journalist will put official reports say that there are 10 dead, but there are eyewitness reports of others. So you start, basically what you start to do as the journalist is tell people what you know and how you know it. What you know and how you know it. And that's what crafts the story. And it's true. Sometimes it's really annoying. And there are often, we do give both or 3 or 4 people the right to give their point of view. And like I always say, one person's going to say that it's raining, the other person's going to say that it's not raining, but the job of the journalist is to go out to the window and see if there's rain. And I don't think, and sometimes people mistake that for bias, and it's not. It's us doing our jobs.
Definitely. No, this is really interesting, and thank you, because, since in the last years, with the social media, internet and everything, fake news kind of like a rise. Like, I think it has existed all the time, but with this, interconnectivity with the world, it's much easier and much faster to create a gossip and make it huge, viral, or to create these news that, well, are fake. And as you were saying, what are the things, and to understand a little bit more, like, what's the job you guys do to really bring us reliable information to the table, even if we don't like it. And as we were saying previously, we have as well to deal with it as an adult and to understand what's going on and see and see what's happening and be aware of the things. But also, it's important to know where this information comes from. So now that we understand the process you follow, what are the recommendations you would give us to filter news? I know you already mentioned, that recommendations like subscribe to a known a newspaper or known website, etc. But would you how would you tell us to do it? Like we, and lead to, and sorry, I forgot the word, and help us make it through understanding if this is really fake news or it's true news, and how we can, in Spanish is discernir, like discern. I think it's in English as well. So
Discernment, yeah, discernment.
discern. Hmm.
So I'll say this, and it's funny that you brought up, gossip. I think gossip is a perfect example. Unfortunately, gossip travels, always spreads like wildfire before technology. There's nothing like juicy gossip. But what's the thing about gossip? That most of the time, there are parts about it that are inflated, that are inaccurate, that are like, by the time it gets to the third person, you're playing this game of telephone, and it's like, you went from, I had an argument with so-and-so, but I had an argument, they threw me out, they threw all my things. By the time the 10th person is telling you, there's no like custody of the chain of command of information.
No.
So fake news is like gossip. And unfortunately, gossip is juicy and it travels fast, but gossip is not news. And unfortunately, news takes like a very meticulous, there's like a meticulous approach to how you put it out. And that's why it's boring. That's why people are like, oh, I have to read that entire economic report. I was like, yeah, yes, you do. But the person there spent a really long time making sure that the numbers made sense, that they were real. They looked for other numbers to see if there were there were any like conflicting figures. And what you're getting is the like you're getting like the summary of all of that. So what would I do? I think subscribe to a legacy media news service. What you're getting there is quality. You're getting like the facts. What else would I do? Stay out. I mean, social media. Take it with a grain of salt, very literally, and ask questions. Ask questions. When you read something that you don't understand or you don't necessarily agree with, research. Go to somewhere else. You saw the New York Times is writing a story about it. Then give yourself 10 minutes. Go and see if the Wall Street Journal wrote about it. Go and see if somebody else wrote about it. I think like that's the best way. And I'm gonna give you a plug. Oh, this is in English, so I don't know if there are news sites. I think sometimes daily news can stress us out in the way that it's presented. I have found, I'll give you the tip, guys. Podcasts are awesome. So the Daily from the New York Times, it's gonna be like 17 minutes, super super pithy, super fast. The next one that I would give you, This American Life, super good stories, like it'll have like texture and sound. It'll be entertaining for you to listen and more enjoyable. And in Spanish, I love Radio Ambulante. Like the stories are great. So it's a way of coming, knowing the news and actually like enjoying it as an experience. I think even if it's complicated information, it can be enjoyable, right? Because we watch movies all the time that are like about terror, that are about war, that are about things, and nobody walks out stressed out.
That's true.
So it's about format,
So to wrap up the podcast, you would recommend our Daily News, American Life, and Radio Ambulante.
I would do the New York Times, The Daily is the one. This American Life is really good too. Also, any of the ones by NPR are really great. And in Spanish, Radio Ambulante. Like I would listen to these. This is a way of getting the news in a much more curated way, and with you can enjoy it as opposed to. I think it can be very enjoyable.
Perfect.
I may also be a nerd, guys. I'm biased, as we know. My only bias is to the fact that I think everyone should read the news.
That's true, but no, that's at the end. That's the message as well. That we need to know what's going on in the world. That's why there are news, because we need to be aware of what's happening every day. And I want to ask you guys, if you have any further questions from me. Now we're about to end our Facebook Live, and I would love to know what you think. If you find this information useful to filter news better, to filter if really they're fake news, and some tips she has given us, very good, to really confirm if verify if the accounts of people and of websites are accurate or not, because sometimes we start following somebody and at the end it's a, I don't know, a robot or whatever, or it's just a scam, and there's a lot of scam going on the internet. So I think the tips you gave us, Romy, are really amazing in everything you share with us. So I want to thank you very much. And it's been
Thank
a
you for having
pleasure
me.
and an honor. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you here and to share all this information, because it's really useful. And I think it's a very new perspective and clear perspective of how we can see things differently, of how news are. Sometimes it scares us that we don't understand, that it stresses us out. But at the end, it doesn't need to be like that. It just, we need to filter better what we're reading and what type of information we need to know, right?
Absolutely. And for everyone else that's watching this after the live, if you make questions in the comments, I promise that I will read through them if you have questions and answer them personally.
Thanks, Romy. That's really awesome. So, this Facebook Live, it stays open, it stays public. So if you want to share it as well with somebody that could benefit, or if you started watching it after we started, you can watch it again and write all your questions and comments below. And if you can share us your experience, and if you're really aware of what's going on, if you read the news, if you listen to podcasts and everything, please let us know, because I think this is very important, that so we can assume our responsibility as adults, as citizens of the world, now that the world is so global. So I would also like to ask you if you have any challenges related to stress that you want us to discuss in the Facebook Live. Please as well write it down. And what issues related to stress, what are your biggest challenges related to stress that you're facing right now as well? If you can write it down. I'm putting the question here on Facebook, so you can let us know your insights, and I can bring us more topics that are of interest for you guys and that will help you handle stress better. So, Romy, thank you again. My name is Ana Stephanie Munoz. I'm a Guatemalan entrepreneur, transformational coach, and stress management expert. I want to thank our audience for being here today and hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.